LinkedIn presents.
Welcome to the Interactive Response System from the National Weather Service, Southern New England office located in Norton, Massachusetts.
For the latest metropolitan area forecasts, please press 1.
Until recently, I was not someone who paid a lot of attention to weather forecasts because I spent most of the last decade living in Los Angeles, a city that is known the world over for its relentless sunshine. Of course, LA doesn't seem like a very sunny place this week. Vicious wildfires are scorching my old city. It's heartbreaking. It's also a really surreal contrast to my memories of living there. It really did feel warm and sunny, day after day, week after week. So constant that you'd blink and it felt like a whole year had passed you by. But a few months ago, my wife and I moved to New England. Now, I obsessively check the forecast the way a day trader checks the markets.
Today, sunny. Highs around 30. Tonight, mostly clear. Lows around 14.
I know these are not Arctic temperatures, but it's a big change for me. I used to be able to walk my dog year-round in shorts. Now, I need a hat, scarf, mittens. The word wind chill hasn't been part of my vocabulary since I was in my 20s living in New York. Now, I use it almost every day. And it's not just the cold that has me down. It's the darkness, the gloom. Especially now that the holidays are behind us and spring feels like a vague promise. When I think about winter, the word that comes to mind is punitive. And yet I know there are people who like winter, who look forward to it. I know this because I'm married to one of them. What's your favorite season?
Fall.
What's your second favorite season?
Winter.
That's my wife, Kirkley. And she adores all sorts of things about this season that I can't stand.
I love winter. I love the way that when it gets really cold, everything kind of twinkles.
She loves wintertime activities.
The weirder and kind of crazier they are, the more I love them, like ice fishing.
She even loves the way winter sounds.
I have a lot of memories being out as a teenager late at night, and everything's sort of blanketed in snow. And there's this experience of a kind of a snow-deafened quiet. And it is just the quietest I've ever heard.
Suffice it to say, our first winter in New England has enchanted her. And how do you think I'm handling this first winter?
I think you've been better since you got a coat.
Which brings us to today's show. I'm Caleb Bissinger, and this is The Next Big Idea. Today, can I learn how to be more like my wife? Can I learn how to love winter? Let the record show I'm not some weirdo for disliking this season. A recent YouGov poll found that nearly half of all Americans, if given the choice, would skip winter altogether. Just wipe it off the calendar. My guest today, Kari Leibowitz, used to be one of those winter haters. But everything changed for her when she moved to a city 200 miles north of the Arctic Circle. She went there to study how residents of such a cold, dark place cope with the wintertime blues. Except she found they weren't blue at all. That discovery led her to write a wonderful new book called How to Winter: Harness Your Mindset to Thrive on Cold, Dark, or Difficult Days. It provides evidence-based strategies to help readers see winter not as a punishment, but as a time of joy and opportunity. Will those strategies work for me? Stay with us to find out.
I'm Jessie Hempel, host of Hello Monday. In my 20s, I knew what I wanted from my career. But from where I am now, in the middle of my life, nothing feels as certain. Work's changing, we're changing, and there's no guidebook for how to make sense of any of it. So every Monday, I bring you conversations with people who are thinking deeply about work and where it fits into our lives. We talk about making career pivots, about purpose and how to discern it, about where happiness fits into the mix, and how to ask for more money. Come join us in the Hello Monday community. Let's figure out the future together. Listen to Hello Monday with Jessie Hempel wherever you get your podcasts.
Kari Leibowitz, welcome to The Next Big Idea.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me.
So I want you to imagine that I have a time machine and I go back 10, 15 years and I ask young Kari, how do you feel about winter? What would she have said to me?
I mean, can I say sucks on the podcast?
Of course.
Yeah. Winter sucks. Winter is the time of year you're just enduring. You're just getting through. You're waiting for summer. You're living for summer. Winter is when, you make your little brother go out and warm up your car before you'll drive him to school. It's when, you're hitting snooze a bazillion times because it's so hard to get up in the dark. It's uncomfortable. It's gloomy. It's boring. What can I say? It's winter.
And you grew up on the Jersey Shore.
I grew up at the Jersey Shore, so it's a summer-centric culture. It's
right. The whole place is a shrine
beach town.
To the summer.
Exactly. Yeah. So, I think I had the normal, what I think is a very predominant view of winter in the U.S. largely, not everywhere, but largely of winter being a really limiting, gloomy time of year, and then compounded by growing up in a beach town that really, shines in the summer. Really exacerbated that.
But things started to change for you around 2013. You just graduated from college. You wanted to get some research experience before going to graduate school. And you came across the work of this Norwegian scientist who studies happiness. Tell us what happened next.
Yeah, so I found the work of Jar Vitterso, and I was really interested in sort of human flourishing, human well-being. How can we use psychology to help people live a good life? And Jar is a world expert in these topics. He studies well-being, he studies meaning, he studies personal growth. And, I knew he was Norwegian, and I reached out to him to see if, he might be interested in working on a research grant together. And, I hadn't done quite enough background research because he informed me that he just happened to be at the northernmost university in the world, which is the University of Tromsø, which is over 200 miles north of the Arctic Circle. And so, of course, I'm thinking Arctic, I'm thinking north, I'm thinking winter, I'm thinking depression.
Right.
And so I'm like, oh, here's this happiness expert, but he lives in this place that must be super depressing. Let's investigate that a little bit.
Okay, so in 2014, you get a Fulbright research scholarship to go to Tromsø, where he's based. Before we talk about your research, just describe the place a little bit more to me. You mentioned it's 200 miles north of the Arctic Circle. What's it look like? What are your first impressions?
Tromsø it's a small island. It's sort of roughly the size of Manhattan. It's got about 70,000 inhabitants. It's surrounded on all sides by water, fjords, mountains. And, it has the feel of sort of a lively small city. But it still has this sort of wild quality, in my opinion, where, you only have to drive for 15 or 20 minutes and it really feels like you are in the middle of nature and you have left the city behind.
And one of the remarkable things about Tromsø is that it has this phenomenon, experiences this phenomenon called polar night, where from November until late January or so, the sun doesn't rise at all. And so, as you said, you're thinking wow, these people must be really bummed out. This must be a rough place to live. But as you get there and as you talk to your mentor, you discover that's actually not quite the case, is it?
I originally suggested putting together a study on winter depression or seasonal affective disorder. And Yoar was basically like, yeah, sure, we could look at that. But actually, the research finds that we don't have that much seasonal depression.
Wild. Because the conventional wisdom or the assumption is that seasonal affective disorder is somehow connected to light exposure, right? That you're not getting enough vitamin D or something, and that's affecting your mood. So ipso facto, if you live really north and there's polar night and the sun never shines, you're gonna be struggling.
That's right. So the sort of original conception of seasonal affective disorder, which was discovered in the U.S. in Maryland in the 1980s, was that it was caused by a lack of sunlight. And this was sort of a reverse engineered theory because light therapy treated seasonal affective disorder. But because of that, there was sort of this logical extension of thinking that was, well, the farther north you get, the darker your winters are, the higher your rates of seasonal affective disorder should be. But once we actually looked at this in places like northern Norway, Iceland, the Netherlands, it turns out that that's not actually the case. And there's not evidence to suggest that it's as simple as lack of sun equals depression or more darkness is going to increase seasonal affective disorder.
I imagine you all of a sudden you walk away from that conversation and you just start looking around and observing wait a second, people here are enjoying the winter time. What are you seeing? What are people doing in Tromsø that's relishing the winter as opposed to just coping with it?
Well, I think people are really adapting their behavior and really changing with the seasons. So the way that they recreate, of course, people say that Norwegians are born with skis on their feet. But as soon as the snow arrives, people are skiing for fun and recreation and also even to commute to the university sometimes. People are really embracing the darkness. So there's a lot of soft lighting, all the cafes, all the restaurants, even in the break room at the psych department at the University of Tromsø, they would light candles over lunch. And so it wasn't this thing of, oh, it's so dark, it's so oppressive. Certainly, some people struggle with the darkness. Some people have issues waking up in the morning. But really, there was this idea that the darkness enabled a cozy vibe. And so I think people were just orienting to the magic of the season and the opportunities of the season in a way that I wasn't used to looking around the world like that.
So after you'd been there for a couple of months, you take a little break, you go back to the States, and you go to visit Stanford because you're thinking about applying to get a PhD in psychology. And spoiler alert, you do get a PhD in psychology at Stanford. And while you're on campus, you meet a professor named Ali Crum. And she studies mindset and how mindset affects well-being. And she says to you, you're telling her about this experience in Norway, and she says, maybe mindset is playing a role here. Now, I think a lot of our listeners probably know the psychological term mindset. They might be familiar with Carol Dweck's pioneering work on this field. But for folks who have no idea what I'm talking about, give us just a little primer. What is mindset, and why do you think Professor Crum thought, oh, there could be something here between mindset and this enjoyment of winter that they seem to be having up in Norway?
So as a psychologist, we think of a mindset as sort of a core assumption about something in the world and how it works. And so it's sort of a selective, biased viewpoint, right? So lots of things in the world, like the nature of intelligence, are complicated, right? There's probably genetic predispositions to your intelligence. And also, we know that you can get smarter with effort and study. But our mindsets really orient us to one perspective or the other. They sort of are a simplified lens or framework through which we see the world. And you can think about this in terms of winter. Winter is multifaceted. Yes, it is cold and it is dark. And then you could make the leap to say that it is gloomy or depressing. But also it can be cozy and magical and special and fun. And this is really what I was looking for, because at the time that I was doing this research, really the only validated psychological measures to talk about the winter were those measuring seasonal depression.
Okay.
So we could measure if you have seasonal affective disorder or not, but what if you actually like the winter? What if you're not just free of depression, but you see some of the good things of the winter? There wasn't really anything out there capturing it. And this idea of mindset has room for this sort of full spectrum of nuance for the complexities of how different people might experience the season.
And the thing that's so exciting about mindset is that we can cultivate new mindsets. We can deliberately shift our mindsets. And I think you began, correct me if I'm wrong, but you began to sort of realize like, oh, wow, this positive winter mindset that seems to be at play here 200 miles north of the Arctic Circle, this is something that you can actually cultivate. This is something you can generate. It's not innate, right? Am I on the right track there?
Yeah, I think this is one of the things that really made me gravitate towards mindset research is the idea that it is something that we can work on and that we can, like you said, intentionally cultivate. And so I think when I'm thinking about, what we can learn from a place like Tromsø, where people seem to, in general, enjoy and appreciate and celebrate the winter a little bit more, is we can say, okay, winter is lots of things. There may be parts of it that I find challenging or unpleasant, but I still am going to choose to work on cultivating a more positive wintertime mindset as seeing winter as full of opportunities, because that's going to be more useful for me, more adaptive for me, and help me get through the season with more comfort and joy and health and well-being and all the other good stuff that we're looking for at this time of year.
Well, I'm glad to hear you say that because I'll level with you. I need some help in this department. For the last 6 years, I've been living in Los Angeles, where I wore shorts in January. But over the summer, my wife and I moved to New England, to Providence, Rhode Island. And when I woke up this morning, it was 17 degrees. The feels like temperature was 7, and it was snowing. It was tough. It's still tough. This is the first real winter I've experienced in quite some time, and I need help. And so I'm hoping that in the course of this conversation, you can kind of help me change my mindset a little bit, help me develop some of these positive winter outlooks. Are you up for that? Can we do it?
Oh, I'm ready. I'm up for the challenge. I love a good mission.
Okay. So I know from your book that there are sort of 3 strategies for cultivating this positive winter mindset. And it's appreciating winter, it's making it special, and it's getting outside. So let's start with appreciating winter. I think for a lot of people, myself included, to use your word from a moment ago, winter just sucks and we dread it and we know it's going to be dark and we know it's going to be cold and it's going to be a little lonely and we're going to be sleepy all the time. But science tells us that those negative expectations that we have are kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy, right? Like the more that we say, oh, winter is the pits, the more that winter is actually the pits.
Our mindsets influence these outcomes, and it sometimes can sound like it's magic, right? I adopt this mindset that winter is dreadful and I have a bad winter. I adopt this mindset that winter is wonderful and I have a great winter. How does that actually work? So our mindsets prime our expectations, so what we think something is going to be like, and then our expectations shape what we actually notice in the world and how we interpret and make sense of those things. So you talked about waking up this morning, it's 17 degrees, it feels like 7, and it's snowing. And from your voice and your facial expressions that I can see, it seems like that is a bad thing. But snow can be really beautiful. Snow can be extremely lovely. The cold can be refreshing, and especially when it's dark in the morning, that blast of cold air, especially when you're dressed appropriately and you just feel it on your face, can actually help you feel alert and awake and refreshed. And going out into that morning air, watching the snow fall, breathing it in, that could be a really nice experience, or it could be a really frigid, uncomfortable experience. Now, some of this is the objective circumstances, right? What clothing are you wearing?
Yeah.
Are you prepared to be outside, which I'm sure we'll talk about in a little bit.
Yeah.
But some of it is also your expectations, that before you even walk out the door, you have an expectation of what that's going to feel like, and that's influencing what you're noticing in that moment and how you're interpreting it in that moment. And so in this way, our expectations become self-fulfilling, where we go out in the world and we are unconsciously attending to things that are aligned with what we expect. And so it makes that reality for us more true. When we expect winter to feel gloomy, then every gray, cold morning gets interpreted not as cozy and peaceful, but as sad and depressing.
And in the book, you connect this to what is one of the strangest findings, I think, in science, the placebo effect. Explain the connection there. I think it's just so wild.
So you might be familiar with placebos as sugar pills that are, most often used in the context of developing new drugs and treatments, where we compare a new drug or treatment to the placebo effect to make sure there's some quote unquote real effect. But what this sort of obscures is the fact that placebos alone have been shown to be effective for many, many conditions and for many, many treatments. So even if someone is taking an inactive sugar pill or getting a sham surgery, for example, that leads to measurable, both subjective but also objective clinical health benefits. And I spent a lot of my time in the Stanford Mind and Body Lab researching placebo effects, trying to unpack them to say, okay, it's not the sugar in the sugar pill or, the saline in the fake injection that's leading to these benefits. What is it? It's things like our mindset, our beliefs, and our expectations of healing, things like how the doctor relates to us, how secure and safe we feel, the social context around us. Also things like the body's natural healing responses, conditioning, our immune system, all those things that help us heal. But what I think of this in terms of winter is I think about it in terms of what we often call the placebo effect's evil twin, which is the nocebo effect, which is basically this effect where if you expect harm from a treatment, that harm is more likely. So we see this with side effects where merely informing patients about the possibility of side effects and which side effects are possible has the effect of making patients experience them more often. And so once you're expecting these side effects, it actually makes them more likely to occur. And in this way, I think we might be noceboing our way into winter, where we expect that winter is going to be depressing, is going to be bad for our health and well-being. And then it is. And this happens in a bunch of different ways. So some of the ways are, what I was talking about before, how it influences your attention, which actually influences your real experience.
Yeah.
Some of it is also how we interpret things in the winter and the attributions we make. So I know a lot of people, if they're feeling down in the winter, let's say, it's January, it's after the holidays, it's cold and it's gray, and you're having a down week, a lot of people will say it's because of the winter. It's because I have seasonal depression. It's because the winter is depressing.
Right.
And that might be contributing to it. But when we have a bad week in the summer, we tend not to blame the summer for it. We tend not to say, oh, yeah, I'm cranky this week because it's, summertime. And so I think, it partially comes from this association we have that winter is depressing, that's a really top of mind explanation for basically anything that goes wrong from November to March.
Okay, we don't want to nocebo ourselves into despising winter. We want to placebo ourselves into enjoying winter. And to pick up on a word used a moment ago, part of this has to do with attentiveness, with attention, and that what we choose to train our attention on can actually shift our mindset. And you write in the book about a psychologist at the University of Vermont who's actually doing some really fascinating work involving people who struggle in the wintertime, training them to sort of refocus their attention. and helping them get over some seasonal depression. Talk a little bit about that research. I think it actually applies to all of us who have, even mild dismay in the wintertime.
The predominant theory was that seasonal affective disorder is caused by a lack of sunlight. And Kelly Rowan, who studies this at the University of Vermont, sort of took a little bit of issue with this. She was like, humans are not passive organisms that merely respond to things like light and then have a predetermined response. We are constantly making meaning and making sense of our environments. And so while light therapy is the traditional and most common therapy for seasonal affective disorder, Kelly Rowan was like, what if we helped people have a different interpretation of the winter and its effect on them? And so she started the use of CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, for seasonal affective disorder. So cognitive behavioral therapy, lots of people might be familiar with it, but if you're not, it's basically a form of therapy that teaches patients to examine and question their thoughts and potentially replace their thoughts, their attributions with more helpful interpretations. So if the days start getting dark and you start thinking to yourself, oh, it's getting dark, I always get depressed in the winter, I know I can't enjoy anything in the winter, a more helpful thing to do might be to examine that, do some journaling, think, is that really true? Is there really nothing I can enjoy in the winter? And then maybe you can start finding some things that you do enjoy in the winter. This is a big part of the CBT program, is what's called behavioral activation, is finding activities that people enjoy in the winter. So in Vermont, knitting circles are really big, taking art classes, dance classes, going to the gym, and then also sort of reclaiming some summer activities as well. So, going beach combing bundled up out in the snow, or going for a snowy walk in a place that you like to walk or hike at other times of year. And what I think is really powerful about this is that it helps people relate to the environment and themselves and their thoughts differently. And so what it does is it gives people the tools to manage their feelings about winter year after year. And so Kelly Rowan's research finds that 2 years after the end of treatment, those who had the CBT are much less likely to still be suffering from seasonal affective disorder than those who got the light therapy, because they're bringing these tools with them for the winters to come.
Interesting. And I love that idea. We'll talk about this a little bit more when we talk about getting outside. But I love that idea of coming up with activities that make the winter special. Like, I happen to work with a bunch of people who are obsessed with skiing, and I find it absolutely insufferable when they just talk about skiing on team meetings, because I'm not a skier. But I think for them, this is this activity that they only get to do in the wintertime, and so something they look forward to and they appreciate about the season. For me, it's making soup. I love making big pots of stew. They smell good. It's so fun. I'm not going to make a big bean stew in August, but it's a wonderful thing to do that I look forward to, that I only get to do for part of the year.
100%. Yeah. And I think this is the thing, is that people who do winter sports tend to look forward to the season because, exactly like you said, there's something special that they enjoy that they only do in the winter.
Yeah.
So the question is, if, like yourself, like myself, you're not a winter athlete, I did not grow up skiing and I do not really know how to ski very well, what are the things that you can do that are special to the winter that you look forward to that make the season both enjoyable and something worth anticipating?
One of the points you make in the book that I just really love and had never considered before is that people who despise winter, we're kind of flying in the face of biology. We're kind of flying in the face of nature. That we want winter to be like summer. But you point out that almost every living thing on the planet goes through some kind of change in the wintertime, some kind of change in behavior. And we think about bears hibernating, but there's examples all over the place. Talk a little bit about that. I think it's so interesting. We have this refusal. Is it baked into our society, into our culture, to accept that, like, this is a slow season. This is a season that we have to, for lack of a better word, hibernate a little bit.
I think a lot of the people who struggle with winter are having this experience where the winter affects them and they don't want to adapt to the way that winter is affecting them. So I hear this a lot during the winter, people being like, I'm just so tired, like I can't find the motivation to do things, like I don't want to go to the gym. What's wrong with me? And it's really an interpretation that it is a personal failure. But the truth is that we are animals on a planet and we are affected by our climate and we are affected by light. And so it's actually quite normal and quite natural to feel more tired, perhaps less motivated this time of year, to crave different foods, to want to socialize differently. And I think that in some ways, we have pathologized that response of saying that, oh, if you need to sleep more in the winter or you are hungrier or you don't feel like socializing in the same way, that's a problem. That's a sign that you have winter depression or you're lazy or whatever. Yeah. But I think that both obscures how natural it is to feel this way and also prevents us from keying into this opportunity to lean into the season and to lean into these feelings and to say, this is my time of year that I slow down, that I rest more. Maybe that means you sleep more, but I know for a lot of people, their schedules, their work, their caregiving responsibilities, they can't actually get a ton more sleep, but maybe you do other things. Maybe you take slightly longer showers. Maybe you change your workout routine and do more flexibility, stretching, strength training, and less cardio.
Yeah.
Maybe the food you make and eat is different. Maybe the way you socialize is different and you do more intimate gatherings, movie nights with friends and family rather than, meeting out, picnics, barbecue, hiking. I think this idea of changing our behavior with the seasons is really healthy and can actually be really freeing when you give yourself permission to say, yeah, I'm feeling the impact of winter on me. And so I'm going to listen to that and I'm going to try to respond in a way that isn't about denying this reality, but that's about adapting to this reality. And I also think, for me, this is really one of the lessons about winter that feels like it can go beyond the season is that, we often have times when, like it or not, we're forced to slow down, right?
Right.
We're sick. Right.
Yeah, we're
recovering from injury.
Yeah.
We're mourning. We're grieving.
Yeah.
We're burnt out. We're recovering from childbirth. And how many of us encounter those things and have never practiced resting for a season or listening to our bodies or responding adaptively and then have a really hard time with it. And I think this idea that we can go in and out of these fluctuations with energy and productivity and motivation is a really healthy and adaptive thing to learn. And winter gives us a chance to actually practice that every year.
I like that you used the word productivity. I was thinking as I read this part of the book of a couple of weeks ago, I worked on this project with Cal Newport, who's the author of this book, Slow Productivity. We made a little mini audiobook based on the book. And he says we should purposefully introduce seasonality into our lives. We should have a balance between moments of intense activity and moments of repose, and that in the long term, that's what makes us productive. That's what protects us from burnout. That's what you gotta just recharge your batteries. You gotta power down the jets sometimes, and winter is an invitation to do that, I think.
Yes, I love Cal's work and writing on this, and I think it's also important to understand that rests for rest's own sake is valuable, but it is also the thing that supports these other periods of productivity, right? So you can see this in the natural world that it looks like everything is dead in the winter, but actually that's when all the plants are gathering their energy to bloom in the spring. And, if peaches don't have enough chill hours, then the fruits won't develop for the summer. And I think thinking about it this way is really healthy and inspiring. And I think it also allows you to go all in on those seasons that you are being really productive, right? Where you can feel good about having that burst of energy. You can meet it when you're ready for it. And also you can know that at the other side of it, you're going to have another cycle of rest and restoration, And I think that those things can feel really good together and be extremely generative if we let them.
Love it. Okay, so now we know how to appreciate winter. Your second strategy for developing a great winter mindset is make winter special. And you spent a lot of time in Scandinavia. We've been talking about Norway, and you've traveled all over in the book. You talk about Finland and Denmark and Iceland. This is something they are really good at in the Nordic and Scandinavian countries, is making winter special. And I think a lot of us have heard about hygge, the art of coziness. Connect that to this idea of making it special. I think in the States, it's gotten a little commercialized, and we think about it as like, I don't know, like light wood and sheepskin candles. But it's actually something pretty different from that.
Right. So I think, hygge is often sold as an aesthetic.
Yeah.
But really, it's an emotion, right? So the direct translation is coziness, but I actually think of it as more of a peaceful contentedness, right? It's that feeling when you can just be. You don't have somewhere to go. You don't have something to do. It's that freedom of sort of guiltless relaxation and rest. And I think winter is a time that is really conducive to this, right? The winter darkness, the winter slowness, this goes to this idea of meeting ourselves where we're at when we feel that call to be a little bit slowed down, to maybe do things that we don't have space for in other seasons, whether those are creative pursuits like painting or music or other arts or cooking, making big pots of soup or, lingering with friends over the dinner table, really, letting winter be a time where we can find that ease. And I think making winter special is about trying to create these opportunities. So if appreciating winter is really about noticing the opportunities, making winter special is saying, I'm going to use my actions to really lean into the season. And I think that a lot of this idea of hygge and making winter special is the difference between not having anything to do versus getting to do less.
When I think about hygge, I think about something that happened to me when I was in college. I went to school in the Midwest, and one year there was this massive ice storm, and the whole campus lost power for 2 days. And I think those were the 2 best days of college. We spent all of our time hanging out in our dorm rooms, drinking cheap wine by candlelight. We took adventures outside to go look at icicles hanging from the eaves of buildings. It was cozy, it was restorative, it was nourishing. And what I don't think I realized at the time was that what made it so great was that I was experiencing a psychological phenomenon known as low arousal positive emotion. So describe what that is. What is low arousal positive emotion? Why was I feeling it as a sophomore in college during an ice storm? And why is it so key to hygge and to making winter special and enjoying the winter?
So low arousal positive emotions are those emotions that feel good, but they are not very activating physiologically. So these are emotions like serenity, peacefulness, contentment, and we can contrast them with high arousal positive emotions like excitement or joy or giddiness. And research shows that in the US, people tend to really highly value high arousal positive emotions. If you ask people to think of happy moments, they think of moments of big excitement and big joy and big emotions. And in other parts of the world, particularly places like East Asia, Japan, Taiwan, people are more likely to equate happiness with this low arousal positivity of feeling calm and content and serene. I think that this might be one of the reasons why we tend to dismiss the pleasures of winter is because I think it's a season that really lends itself to low arousal positivity, right? You're sitting there, you're drinking cheap wine by candlelight, you're, walking outside, maybe slowly really observing your surroundings. Those are sort of low arousal activities. And I think that winter can be an opportunity to cultivate our appreciation for those emotions and to say, this is my time of year to experience a different type of positive emotion than, summer and I'm swimming and I'm at the beach and I'm running around and I'm kayaking and I'm, doing whatever barbecues in the summer. And winter is my time for more of a peaceful contentedness that I think is really powerful, but we often don't gravitate towards as much.
It's the difference between a roller coaster and the lazy river at the water park, But the thing I think you also point out, which I love, is that, survey after survey finds that Nordic countries, those people are typically the happiest people on earth. And a lot of folks say, oh, well, it must be because they have a great social safety net. And they do, and they're certainly part of it. But it seems like another piece could be that here in the States, we're obsessed with high arousal, positive emotions. And for them, happiness is actually low arousal. Maybe their whole definition of happiness is a little bit different than ours. And that might be why they are so consistently happier than we are.
I do think, yeah. So when Finland is often rated as the happiest country in the world. But if you go to Finland, you're not going to see people smiling like Americans, and being really cheerful. And I think it's a definition of happiness that is really about contentment and life satisfaction and ease. And certainly, yes, the social safety nets give you that sense of security and peacefulness. Yeah. But I do think, if we equate happiness with these high highs of our greatest achievements, the things that happen once every couple of years, it makes it really rare to experience that, where perhaps a low arousal positivity or a low arousal kind of happiness of contentment and satisfaction and peacefulness is more accessible on a day-to-day basis and is perhaps an easier thing to grasp in our everyday life.
And it's something that we can ritualize in our lives. You write about the power of ritual, and you counsel readers to sort of think about in the wintertime having sort of small rituals, mid-sized rituals, and maybe bigger annual rituals that are all about celebrating wintertime. Tell me, what kind of small, medium-sized, and big rituals do you have? What have you institutionalized in your life that have helped you enjoy winter?
So for me, the small rituals, definitely lighting candles, I have to say. And, it's almost like a winter cliche, right?
Totally.
Like light some candles and you won't be depressed. You've heard it before. But for me, it really takes on a different meaning because it's a way of embracing the darkness. So literally, as I'm recording this podcast, I have my 3 little candles lit next to my desk because it's dark out here. And so it's a way of sort of, having the darkness where here I live in Amsterdam, the sun sets at 4:45. And now I get to have this cozy atmosphere for my evening meetings and my work and my dinner and whatever I'm doing. Mm-hmm. And then I have other sort of mid-size rituals that I do. So I take a lot more baths in the winter, which is not something I do in the summer, especially if I go out for an evening walk and I come in and I'm cold, then I take a nice bath, which research actually shows can improve your sleep in the winter.
Oh, interesting.
And so especially, if I'm feeling really tired, I feel like it helps me sleep more deeply.
Yeah.
And then I think, a lot of us have these bigger rituals often around the holidays that are really special. So, we throw a big Hanukkah party every year called Vodkas and Latkes, where we make a lot of latkes and we drink some vodka.
Love that.
We gather people. But I think, Also, I aspire to do more things into January and February after the holidays are over. So, going to museums with friends or the theater with friends, once a winter as like a big gathering. So I think, these idea of rituals, they give us something to lean on in dark times, and they give us things to look forward to, and they help put a routine and sort of grease the wheels of engaging in these activities that make the winter feel special, that take advantage of the opportunities that the cold and the dark of the season provides.
I was just talking with my wife the other day. I was like, do you remember how fun Super Bowl parties were when we were kids? And I was like, why is that? We don't like football. But it was like the one thing to look forward to in February. You got to stay up late on a Sunday night and you ate like weird multi-layered dips, something you never eat at any other time of the year. And you're watching this game and it's young people and old people. And yeah, it was a great annual ritual, whether or not one cares about football.
I think that's the time of year we really need it, right? Like I think of January and February as almost like the winter doldrums. And I've seen people now doing things like doing a February feast where they have like a big multi-course dinner party for friends in February, but like something to look forward to and occupy them. I also think it's a really good time of year for more passive hangouts where you say like, come over, we'll put on a reality TV show and just like be on our phones or read books or just sort of like coexist in the same space, You need that socialization in the winter, but your energy is really low. So how can you make the gatherings feel low effort also in a way that gives you that connection and that socialization that can really be an antidote to sort of the loneliness sometimes people feel in the winter?
I love that idea of low energy or passive hangs. I think there is so much pressure like, oh, well, if we're going to hang out, we must do an activity.
We got to sit and catch up. And
we have to have a deep conversation. And I love that. Like, just come sit around. Maybe we'll talk. Maybe we'll watch something.
Just be near me.
Stay near me, listeners. We'll be right back.
I'm Jessie Hempel, host of Hello Monday. In my 20s, I knew what I wanted from my career. But from where I am now, in the middle of my life, nothing feels as certain. Work's changing, we're changing, and there's no guidebook for how to make sense of any of it. So every Monday, I bring you conversations with people who are thinking deeply about work and where it fits into our lives. We talk about making career pivots, about purpose and how to discern it, about where happiness fits into the mix, and how to ask for more money. Come join us in the Hello Monday community. Let's figure out the future together. Listen to Hello Monday with Jessie Hempel wherever you get your podcasts.
From the minds of visionaries to the desks of disruptors, I'm Lars Schmidt, host of the Redefining Work podcast. Join me each week as we explore the new world of work through the lens of those shaping it. CEOs, HR leaders, investors, and more. Be a part of the conversation that changes everything. Subscribe to Redefining Work today.
Okay, so we've talked about making winter special. Let's talk about getting outside. I think for a lot of people, this is maybe the toughest sugar pill to swallow because it's cold out there. It's freezing. So talk me into it.
So first of all, I'll say it's the toughest for me too. And I have to relearn it every winter. So, I live in Amsterdam now. I get around mostly by bike. And when it gets cold and it's raining, every fall, beginning of winter, I'm like, damn, I do not want to get on my bike in the rain. And so I think there's a number of things we can do. The first and the most important thing is, I think, dressing appropriately for the weather.
Yes.
And this is something I really learned in Norway. I think this is probably something that, having lived in LA for so long, it might be a little bit of an investment for you to get the proper gear again. But it makes such a difference. I mean, in Scandinavia, they say there's no such thing as bad weather, only bad clothing. breathing.
Right.
And I would say start there. Dress appropriately for the weather and just do an experiment. Challenge yourself to walk for 15 or 20 minutes. This is what I challenge my students to do or in my workshops. And people are shocked by how good it can feel, how pleasurable it can be to be out in the very cold, in the rain, in the snow, in the wet, when you are dressed appropriately. There's something about the contrast between moving your body however you can, feeling the cold air, feeling the weather. It can be so, so nice. And I think it's one of those things you have to just try with an open mind and then see how it feels. Even if I just take a short walk or go outside with my coffee in the morning for a few minutes, I come back and I'm in a better mood. I feel more able to tackle my day. I'm more patient with myself and my partner and my dog. And I feel really good. And I think noticing that and remembering that the next time I'm having that mental resistance to going out, reminding myself that, okay, if I don't want to, I can just go out for 5 or 10 minutes and then I'll come back and I'll feel better. And then usually once I'm out, it's actually really nice to be out there.
I was thinking just now about this. This is a strange reference, but there's a line in the TV show Mad Men where a character says, "I like going away and being bad so I can come home and be good." They're obviously talking about adultery, but I was thinking it's kind of fun to go outside and be cold so you can come home and be warm.
Yes. And that's part of it, is like the pleasure of returning inside to somewhere that is warm, that feels good. When you have that sort of cold on you, you've moved a little bit, you've connected with the fresh air. That is such a pleasurable experience. And I think that that is one that people don't give the cold credit for that. You know, they're like, oh, if it feels good to come inside, it's because I don't like the cold and I don't like the winter. But that good feeling of coming inside is only possible because you've been out in the cold during this time of year.
And I think we've all, certainly in the States, fallen for a myth, which is that being cold is bad for you. But in fact, and you write about this in the book, and I'd love for you to talk about it, being cold is really good for you. Being cold is really healthy. I mean, not, like you write quite a bit about cold water swimming or cold water plunging and the insane health benefits of that. Talk a little bit about why being cold is physiologically beneficial.
So there's a lot of evidence that the cold is actually healthy for you. So repeated cold exposure, especially in terms of cold water swimming, stimulates the production of what's known as brown fat. Now, for a while, we thought that only babies had brown fat. So if you've ever noticed, babies don't shiver. So they cannot shiver to warm themselves up. And so most of the fat in their bodies is brown fat, which is temperature regulating, and it regulates your metabolism. And we thought that as you grew up, you lost all of your brown fat. But then we learned that in people who have regular and repeated cold exposure, so people who work long hours outside in the cold or people who do regular cold water swimming, they actually have brown fat, and it's possible to develop the presence of brown fat. And brown fat helps regulate your temperature, so you actually feel warmer when it's cold and cooler when it's hot. It's good for your metabolism. It's protective against things like diabetes and heart disease because it regulates your insulin levels. So there's evidence that this repeated cold exposure stimulates the production of brown fat, that it can even boost your immune system so that you're less susceptible to colds. And this is really a view that is predominant in Scandinavia. So in Scandinavia, they often leave babies dressed up, fully bundled in these like little furry sleeping bags in their strollers outside to take a nap. So people will put the baby in the back garden for nap time. And there's research that shows that babies sleep longer and more deeply in cold temperatures. So this time outside in the cold can be really healthful and invigorating. And it's one of those things where like, just knowing that, I think, can really change your experience of being out in the cold.
Sure.
From, frigid and a little bit frightening to invigorating, and you feel robust and you feel vital for having spent time out in the cold.
Totally. I mean, it's the same as like if you're doing a hard workout and you tell yourself, look, this is good for me. This is good for me. It feels better, even if it's tough.
Yes,
and
absolutely.
Similarly, knowing whether you're brave enough to do cold open water swimming, which I'm not sure I'm there yet, but even, you're on a cold
Even
walk
being
or something.
out in the cold, yeah.
We're almost out of time, but we're talking at the beginning of 2025. 2024 was, I believe, the hottest year on record. And we're talking about winter, a season that is really imperiled by climate change. And, we said at the beginning, you said at the beginning that you're a former winter hater, but you've become, not just a winter lover, but a real evangelist for saving winter. And you're involved with some organizations that are actively trying to protect our winters. Talk a little bit about that advocacy work that you're doing. I think it's really, really important.
So I'm on the Science Alliance for an organization called Protect Our Winters, which was actually founded by winter athletes. It was founded by snowboarder Jeremy Jones, who was sort of noticing that it was getting harder to find good places to go snowboarding. The places where he used to reliably be able to count on really good snow didn't have that anymore. And he also noticed that there weren't any organizations for winter lovers like him devoted to climate advocacy, because the truth is, if you look at people who participate in outdoor winter sports, whether that's athletes or resort owners or people who like to vacation in those places, it's a huge constituency. And so Protect Our Winters advocates for policies that fight climate change to literally protect winter. And I think my hope with helping people embrace winter is that it will inspire more of us to understand what we lose when we lose winter. Because I think, for a while, there was this idea of like, oh, global warming, great. Like, who doesn't want it to be warmer in the winter, We hate the winter. We hate the cold. Like, let it be warm. But there's so much that is lost from, places that are really on the borderline where a few difference in degrees in the winter is the difference between a snowy winter with room for outdoor sports and recreation versus a gray, wet, rainy winter, which is a lot harder, I think, to enjoy. There's a lot fewer opportunities for outdoor recreation. But I've been learning about all these complex ways that losing winter affects other things. So, lots of crops, if they don't have enough time in the cold, they can't bloom. So, an early warm spell in Georgia a couple of years ago caused the peaches to bloom early. And then when it was cold again later in the season, as expected, all of them froze and it wiped out the peach crop. And so the stone fruits that we love in the summer are in danger if we don't have the winter. Or lakes where you go swimming, if it's not freezing over the winter, then it doesn't kill the algae and bacteria in the lakes. And so they're full of algae and scum and you can't enjoy them in the summer. And so, these things are so interconnected that not only do we need to protect winter for winter's sake, but we need to protect winter for summer's sake as well. And I think people are really starting to feel that, as you said, 2024 was the hottest year on record. And way more than when I started talking about this, I get people saying, yeah, how to winter. I need how to summer. I can't take the heat. It's too hot.
Yeah.
And I think people are really starting to feel that.
All right. Well, Kari, I think you've succeeded. I think you have helped me learn how to winter. I look forward to going forth in what's left of the cold season and taking full advantage of it. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Mission accomplished. It was so great to be here. Thanks for your awesome questions.
Kari Leibowitz's new book, How to Winter, is out now. Pick up a copy wherever you get your books. If you live somewhere cold, you will not be disappointed. By the way, if you're not convinced about the health benefits of being cold, get this. It reduces chronic inflammation, remodels your metabolism, and creates mitochondria. I don't entirely know what all those things mean, but I do know they are all really good for you. So maybe think about that next time you're out shoveling. And if the good stress of cold exposure just is not your thing, maybe try the good stress of a sauna. Kari and I ran out of time before we could talk about this, but in her book, I learned that regular sauna sessions can treat insomnia, hypertension, chronic pain, and asthma. They improve skin conditions and circulation, lower blood pressure, improve lung function, boost your immune system, can even lower your cholesterol. There's a reason why in Finland, where there's approximately 1 sauna for every 2 people, they call it the poor man's pharmacy. Today's episode was written and edited by me, Caleb Bissinger, sound design by Mike Toda. Our executive producer is Rufus Griscom, and we would have a low-energy hangout with the team at the LinkedIn Podcast Network anytime. Okay, I'm gonna go light some candles.